Have you ever thought about the hidden empires within our cities? I'm not talking about, shiny skyscrapers, something much less glamorous, but wow, equally impactful. Today we're doing a deep dive into this really extraordinary legal fight. It reveals an empire of, a very different kind. At the heart of it is the city of Chicago.
Hmm.
They're accusing a North Shore businesswoman and her sister of fraud, and it's all connected to this huge network, an empire, they call it, of neglected and, frankly, hazardous vacant lots across the city's south and west sides. So our mission today for you, our listener, is to really unpack these complex fraud accusations and the millions, truly astonishing millions at stake, plus the surprising backstory of these properties. It's a story about urban blight, sure, but also financial maneuvering and a city really pushing back.
Yeah, what's really fascinating here, I think, is how this one case kind of pulls together all these different threads. You've got urban development, the responsibilities of property owners, and some pretty sophisticated legal strategies. It creates this really complex picture for everyone involved. And ultimately, this isn't just about one family. It shines a light on the systemic challenges cities face with absentee landlords and urban decay.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Who exactly is at the center of this story, and what does this empire actually look like on the ground?
Right. So the main individuals are Suzie B. Wilson, she's from Northbrook, and her sister, Swedlana Dass. And together, they control just a staggering number of properties. We're talking about 812 parcels.
812.
Yeah. Estimated market value, around $17.8 million.
Wow.
Now, it's important to understand most of these are empty lots, often in, pretty distressed neighborhoods like Inglewood out on the south and west sides.
Yeah.
But some are also in struggling south suburbs, places like Dalton, Harvey, Robbins.
That scale is just incredible. How did they even manage to acquire so many properties, especially if, like you said, a lot were in these less desirable areas?
Well, it wasn't through your typical real estate development path, that's for sure. Suzie Wilson started the business with her sister back in 1987. Then, just 2 years later, her husband, Michael Wilson, who's now deceased, he was a tax attorney. He apparently helped them acquire properties. And they did this through Cook County's tax and scavenger sales.
Ah, the tax sales.
Right, exactly. So this mechanism, it basically allowed them to take control of properties just by buying up the unpaid property taxes. Sometimes for, pennies on the dollar, really. It was a way for the county to get these tax-delinquent properties off their books quickly.
So bids could start really low.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes bids started at just $250 per lot.
$250.
It's a strategy designed to accumulate a lot of land very, very cheaply.
So they built this empire essentially from properties maybe nobody else wanted with minimal upfront cash. And you mentioned it wasn't all just vacant land.
Right, yeah. While it's mostly empty lots, their portfolio does include a small number of rental properties. Those apparently generate about $290,000 a year.
Okay. And here's a really interesting twist, isn't it? Some of these properties, initially maybe unwanted, are now actually quite valuable.
That's right. Some are situated directly in the path of the CTA Red Line extension.
Big project.
Huge. And others are near Jackson Park, which, is home to the Barack Obama Presidential Library.
So it's this portfolio of really contrasting fortunes. You've got blight, and then you've got potential gold mines side by side. Okay, so as this huge portfolio grew, it wasn't just a collection of assets on paper. It started becoming a real problem for the city and these communities. What were the specific issues that started piling up?
Well, the main problem, the one that really led to the city's frustration, involved millions of dollars in unpaid municipal tickets.
Millions.
Millions. For violations like, overgrown weeds, garbage dumped on these vacant lots. Pretty standard stuff, but on a massive scale.
And these weren't just small fines, right?
No, not at all. We're talking specific fines up to $1,200 per ticket. And they just kept accumulating over time. And the neglect, according to the city, was severe. It wasn't just like messy lots. They're allegations of an open dump, basically. Junk vehicles, propane tanks, flammable materials in one spot in Inglewood, and another hazardous tire dump in West Inglewood.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, these aren't minor things. They pose serious public health risks, safety risks for the people living nearby.
You can really feel the city's frustration. Mary Richardson Lowry, she's Chicago's Corporation Counsel. She asked pretty pointedly, we're supposed to do what? Clean it for her? Are we supposed to clean up the trash for her?
Yeah.
It just captures that feeling of, the burden falling on the city.
Absolutely. And just to give you a sense of the scale of the debt we're talking about, the businesses owed the city over $15 million just in unpaid tickets.
15.
Just tickets.
Yeah.
Plus potentially millions more in other legal judgments. So this case, it really starkly illustrates what happens when, private property neglect turns into this enormous public burden.
Right.
The city ends up being the kind of de facto maintenance crew, right? Bearing the cost for cleanup, for safety measures, that really should be the owner's job.
Okay, so you have this huge debt, hazardous properties.
Yeah.
The city needs to act. And this is where the story gets really, really interesting. Because faced with this mountain of debt, Wilson's network, about 20 companies filed for bankruptcy.
Right.
But the city isn't buying the bankruptcy claim, are they? They're crying foul.
Exactly. The city's fraud accusations are pretty specific and quite bold. They claim Wilson and Dass basically concealed their wealth
Oh.
by allegedly transferring their local properties around like candy, as the city put it, to newly created shell companies. And where were these shell companies based?
South Dakota, right. That seemed odd.
South Dakota. And that's crucial because South Dakota corporate filings don't require ownership to be disclosed. So this case really highlights how these, seemingly obscure corporate registration laws in one state can be strategically used, allegedly, to hide assets and dodge local accountability somewhere else. It's a huge challenge for cities trying to enforce their rules.
And the alleged way they move the money sounds pretty audacious, too.
Mm-hmm.
The city says whenever properties were sold, Wilson and Dass would just write checks to themselves from these South Dakota shell companies. But they'd call them fake loans. The memo line would say something like, "We'll pay back funds when available."
Right. And the city's court filing sort of sarcastically asks, but on what terms and when?
Mm-hmm.
And then it answers itself. The answer was whenever they wanted to, which was never. Yeah, clearly implying these weren't real loans, just a way to drain the money out away from creditors and keep those Illinois companies broke.
So the city's argument is this whole maneuver left the Illinois companies completely insolvent.
Exactly. The city argues the fraud could not be clearer. And on top of that, the city alleges Wilson and Dass refused to hand over essential corporate books, records, tax filings, stuff the city is legally entitled to see in a bankruptcy case.
Right.
They even point to financial records from BMO Bank and Chase Bank accounts, showing, quote, significant sums of money were transferred from the debtors' accounts without any legitimate reason. It paints a picture of, deliberate evasion.
So faced with all this, the bankruptcy, the alleged shell games, how is the city fighting back? They obviously aren't just rolling over.
No, definitely not. They've launched what you could call a multi-pronged counteroffensive.
Okay.
So within the bankruptcy case itself, the city's the biggest creditor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they actually agreed to a $4 million loan Wilson's companies wanted. This was to prep properties for sale. But they only agreed after negotiating $700,000 up front for the city.
Smart.
Yeah. And they got another $454,000 from sales of some Wilson-owned properties that the Chicago Transit Authority needed for that Red Line extension.
Ah, the valuable ones.
Exactly. The thinking is if they can sell off, say, 150 to 200 of these properties, it could potentially raise over $12 million, which would go a long way towards settling the city's claims and maybe finally dealing with some of these neglected lots.
And this fight isn't just focused on Wilson's companies anymore, is it? The city's broadening its approach.
That's right. Mary Richardson Lowry, the corporation counsel we mentioned,
Yeah.
she's leading a wider city initiative. They've formed a new special collections unit, 3 new attorneys just for this.
Okay.
And their mission is to go after other big debtors, too. They're targeting 10 others who, combined, owe the city $26.3 million in unpaid fines.
Wow. So Wilson might be the first, but not the last.
Seems that way.
Hmm.
Richardson Lowry said, quote, "We decided to begin this pursuit with the worst of the known offenders." It's a pretty clear signal.
And beyond the bankruptcy court, they're hitting them with separate lawsuits, too.
Yeah, big ones. The city is suing Suzie Wilson personally in Cook County Court. They're seeking more than $28.7 million.
$28 million. For what specifically?
Specifically for failing to clean up those hazardous dumps we talked about in Englewood, in West Englewood.
Okay.
And the legal action doesn't stop there. It extends to the family. The city is also suing Suzie Wilson's son, Matthew. They're seeking $1.1 million from him.
From the son. Why?
For alleged violations at 4 properties he controls. The city claims he worked, quote, under his mother's apparent tutelage, and that he also, quote, neglects the properties so that they become eyesores at best and open dumps of toxic waste at worst.
This is getting really personal.
It really is.
There was even that brief legal fight involving Matthew's lawyer, right?
Oh,
Andrew Saldinger.
Yeah, that happened. He argued the city's actions were basically driven by deep-seated hatred and resentment for Suzie Wilson.
Mm.
He even tried to get sanctions against the city's lawyers.
Did that work?
No, the judge denied it. But it just shows how, incredibly contentious and bitter this whole thing has become. Both sides clearly feel very strongly wronged here.
Okay, so we've heard the city side, the allegations, the legal actions. It's a dramatic picture. But it's important we also understand Suzie Wilson's perspective. She has her own narrative for how things got to this point.
Absolutely. And she laid out her defense in a court filing. She states that the original plan was actually to sell off these properties more than 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But she says that strategy got completely upended back in 2008 by the Great Recession.
Ah, the 2008 crash.
Right. So this is just maybe the accumulation of all these neglected lots wasn't, intentional neglect from day one. Perhaps it was more a consequence of the economic downturn, making it impossible to sell the land as they had planned.
And she also complained that the city made things worse. Right.
Yes, she argued the city exacerbated their hardship by just continuously hitting them with fines for maintenance issues.
You can see how that could become a tough cycle. You're trying to sell, the market tanks, the properties fall into disrepair. Then the fines pile up, making it even harder to fix the problems or sell, maybe pushing you towards bankruptcy.
It's definitely a complex picture.
Yep.
And it's worth remembering, this isn't the first time Wilson has clashed legally with the city over property maintenance. She actually sued the city before in federal court.
Oh, really? What about...
She argued the city didn't have a right to fine them for not cutting the grass on these vacant lots.
How did that turn out?
She lost that case.
Okay.
But that previous battle, it really highlights this ongoing tension, doesn't it? Between property owners, especially large-scale ones, and the municipalities they operate in. It underscores that constant push and pull between individual property rights and the collective community impact when properties are neglected.
Right. So we've really peeled back the layers on this incredibly complex case. We've gone from this idea of an empire of neglected lots through these really serious allegations of fraud involving shell companies and fake loans, all the way to the city's determined fight, not just in bankruptcy court, but with lawsuits and new enforcement units.
Yeah, and if we try to connect this to the sort of bigger picture, this deep dive into the Wilson case, it really isn't just about one family or even just Chicago. It highlights this pervasive issue of urban blight that so many cities grapple with. It shows the challenges of holding absentee owners accountable, especially when they own vast numbers of properties, and it reveals the innovative and, sometimes controversial methods cities feel they have to use to manage their landscapes and their finances. At the end of the day, what this case really brings into focus is that enduring tension between individual property rights on one side and the collective burden of urban decay on the other. And it forces cities to get creative, maybe even push boundaries in their search for accountability.
So considering everything we've explored today, from how these properties were first acquired, sometimes for just a few $100s, right? To these current legal battles involving tens of millions, here's something to think about. What do you think is the ultimate responsibility that comes with property ownership, especially when it's on such a vast scale like this? And maybe more importantly, how do we ensure that ownership actually serves the community and isn't just about individual profit, especially when things go wrong?